Hey, join me today as we dive into the challenge of proving why I think and Boris thinks security testing has to be a top priority for quality engineers and software testers in 2024 and beyond. Today, we'll be talking all about it with Boris on why security testing is an important skill for QEs. So if you don't know, Boris is a senior quality engineer with a passion for agile testing, test automation, and one of those rare unicorns, cybersecurity. Currently, he works as a director of quality assurance at IBM IX. So he really knows his stuff. I'm really personally excited about this topic. You don't want to miss it? Check it out. Hey, Boris, welcome to the Guild.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Really nice to be here. I'm listening this podcast for more than 1 year, even I think more than 2 years. And it's really excited now that I'm talking and not just listening.
Yeah, I'm so happy you actually reached out to me. So I just give a shout out to that. Anyone that has a topic you want to learn about, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. And this is one I'm really been not struggling with, but kind of stumbling with for the past few years. I used to have a separate online conference called Secure Guild, and I can never really get it off the ground because I always get pushback from testers saying, hey, it's not my job. Security testing, I have my own team. So I guess that's setting the background. Before we get into that, though, what got you into cybersecurity or security testing?
So in general, they just said, I fully understand the concerns, for example, QAs have in terms of, I'm not a cybersecurity engineer, and that's also not what I'm saying. So the depth, the know-how that you need is really it's huge and it's really hard to get if you don't focus on this fully. However, what I think is that kind of cybersecurity fundamentals will help the application itself that we deliver to the client. And basically also as me as a QA, when I gain this know-how, I will also be able to provide additional quick feedback before it maybe some things are shipped or maybe going to a cybersecurity company or even a cybersecurity engineer. Because at the end of the day, it's about the customer satisfaction who uses this application, right? And we have to work and cope with it to avoid maybe some data being leaked, or in general, out of my experience, this actually not even super highly sophisticated security hacks. It's sometimes super simple that every QA can do, and where we can really add a lot of value in there.
No, it's a great point. I've seen SQL injection as a problem since I started my career over 25 years ago. And if you go to OWASP and things like that, it's always still a top security concern. So a QA, then, as you mentioned, doesn't need to necessarily be a security expert, but how do they get that as part of their work then? Or that they're doing a sprint planning, the definition of done, they need to do a whole bunch of activities. How do they know, or how do they get their teams to be aware that, we're not necessarily the security team, but we could still do test cases that help with the security of the application as we're building it?
Yeah, correct. So I think there are many ways on how we as QAs can contribute. I think first of all, it actually starts in having some SAST in place. So static application security testing in place. That actually helps also the developers. And when we develop code, for example, just to also detect already some security issues, which might be having hard-coded password as a prime example. Trust me, it still happens. It's not that this is something like, no, this won't happen on application. This for sure can happen. But I think it's as a first step, we as QAs can help to set those things up, maybe even consult, involve a cybersecurity engineer in properly to set this up properly. As I said, for example, checking the source code, but it also might be checking the packages that you have. And about Node.js, you typically have the npm, and when you just type npm install, it will print you out some security vulnerabilities that you will have on packages, right? And I would say we as QA also should drive this together with the developer, make the developers aware of it, and also kind of, I wouldn't say fight for that, but make also time that we can also fix such issues, because those are typically low-hanging fruits when it comes to SAST. As a next step, typically because you mentioned agile and sprints and so on, I think what we can do is, as you said, already create some test cases where we also cover some of the edge cases. let's say, for example, we implement the login feature. So when I think about the login feature, my first thought would be, what about the recapture? Do we need, like, how do we protect it? This is like, I don't need to be necessarily a cybersecurity expert to be able to bring such perspective. And I think we as QAs quite often have the perspective, the technical, but also on the other hand, the business perspective. And this is like also think about on I as a user, how I can be protected in a way from, it's really quite often really obvious security issues. And yeah, that I would say that's of course the test cases, the SaaS that I mentioned. And I would say also where we can bring a lot of value is in designing session-based exploratory test sessions together with the teams. So, we have those, for example, personas that I can do. And imagine now you create the persona where you have the hacker. How is hacker called? Where you can see this is the objective of the hacker, this is the approach of the hacker, this is what the hacker want to do. And then you organize such a session where have like, let's say also typical personas, but you have also like the hacker persona. And you then just let, for example, the developer pick the persona and really think about they are now the hacker. What could they do? You could that, for example, do on a release level, but you could also do that on a feature level. What I just mentioned, login, for example. So how could such a hacker maybe, right, bypass the authentication mechanism, or what could a hacker do? And yeah, as I mentioned, so for exploratory testing, we have one path is the persona, and the other path, what we also as a quantist could do is create charters, where we could say, for example, we could create in case of the login, as a hacker, I want to bypass the security restriction by providing some SQL injections, or we could make it broader by some injections. And there are like different, things what you can use there to apply it, and you can be really creative. And that, out of my experience, that's typically what the developers likes the most to test. It's not having the checklist, but it's really like, having this creativity that they can play out, and that really helps also to boost it. Yeah. So, and additional point, what I want to add there is, of course, we as QAs test. That's also like when we test a feature, we can bring in this perspective, of course. But I think also at moment when we have like very critical releases, very critical features that we want to release, let's say, for example, we add a new payment method within the checkout. There, we might then consider a security expert to actually pen test it once we maybe done some basics checks. And I think that's really something that adds a lot of value also from the whole team perspective in addition to that, because sometimes you really need an expert. You can't test all like maybe the tricky combinations, but the low hanging fruits, I'm pretty sure confident a Scrum team can cover a lot of those things.
All right, so there are a bunch of great points you just made there. The first one that jumped out on me is when I think of testers, I think of them as leaders. And so you just made a great point. They don't necessarily have to do everything, but they do need to be aware enough to say, hey, this may be a task the developer should look at. Maybe I should reach out to the security team to do pen testing, like you said. How do you empower your testers, though, to take that on? Because a lot of times they think like, oh, I'm in a box, I can't step outside of this box. I don't know if you have that problem, but I've seen organizations where a tester is just like, they feel like they're in a little box and a little vertical and they can't break out of it.
Yeah, so that's a very valid question. I think how you empower them, I think first of all, they need some education first to understand it. And typically what we also do, we show some like real examples from our projects to see like, really, guys, it's really happening. And to also on the one hand motivate them. So first to have the know-how. I mean, that's to gain that, it's not easy. But typically also within IBM X, we support our people. We have an academy where they can do specific trainings to educate them. So as a first step. And once to educate, it's then also about a lot about knowledge sharing. So between QAs, even outside of a project, as we are an agency, right? We have like many different QAs working in many different projects, but they can exchange information. And that's also, I would say, also how we motivate our people to also take a look at that aspect, because it's really happening on project level in general. So not even talking about our projects that we have, but I just also recently have taken a look on a website where, for example, it was a web shop where I just typed, they had like, when I do something, they contact the backend API, and in the backend API, I just added like a path, a random path, and all of a sudden I was logged in as a user, which I thought, like, really, that's that easy. It was like anonymous user in a way, but still, so it's really reality, and we have to adjust to the reality, I would say.
Absolutely. So another thing you mentioned, which I really liked, is the exploratory aspect of it.
Yeah.
I used to work on a team where I had like 8 to 10 sprint teams, but we'd come together every quarter or every 4 weeks to do exploratory testing, and that's where we tended to find the biggest or the most valuable bugs. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? Then, how you get the team involved? Because it is quite an initiative to tell your boss, "Hey, we're going to take these developers off developing, and they're going to focus on testing in a sense."
Yes, that's a very good point, I would say. So in general, what we do, we really try. So for exploratory testing, typically you need to prepare very well. Let's call it like that. So at the beginning, before we even start an exercise, we look, okay, are we gonna apply personas? Are we gonna do maybe some charters, create some charters that make sense, right? And typically we then organize the session, let's say, much in advance, that there is sufficient time also for developers, to plan things in and everything. And then once we execute it, we are typically very organized. So we have like 5 minutes introduction where we explain everything, and then kind of they typically use those personas. We also decide in the team, like, not to have like, all the people use the same personas. They have a good mix, and then they start and they have their time. And as soon as they discover something, they document it. For example, we use Confluence and they document it just very briefly, right? And once, typically it takes 1 hour, maybe even half an hour. It really depends on the complexity in general, on the requirements. But afterwards, we then have a follow up for 5 to 10 minutes where we quickly discuss the findings. And then typically we as a QA take this onwards, ask questions directly to developer if there are some questions, whatever they reported, and then we follow up on that. So we don't want, in this case, we try to keep the work as little as possible for the developers, but kind of we then we prepare everything, we like host everything, and we also take on the next steps to clarify maybe if something is really a security issue. Is it maybe a new requirement that we just forgot? Like it could be a recapture on some login registration or something like that.
Nice. So, I know in certain verticals like healthcare and financials, you can actually be in big trouble by the FDA if you're audited, if a lot of these things get leaked, especially for PII and things like that. So, and yet once again, those testers there, sometimes they don't do security. And I tend to see that the security team is like completely isolated from everyone else, and they just get like verdicts on down from the security team, thou shalt do that. So I don't know. Do you have any experience of trying to breaking down that wall? Because there still seems to be testers, developers are now part of the same team, but yet we still have, the security team almost is like this Nubius, other somewhere else that does it, what it does. And we have no idea what they're doing. We don't necessarily work with one another.
Yeah. So I think as of now, I can say you like, this is like the recipe that works for everything. It always depends on the project and also like how the security team is placed and what their responsibility is. I think as of now, our solution is always to kind of more, when we see the need, to try to involve some, right, based on the need, but like really to have it in a project permanently, it's really impossible. I would say when you take a look at maybe the scaled agile frameworks that we have, is it safe? I don't know, whatever the framework is. But let's say you might have literally 10 or more teams working on different features and so on. where you can't ask the security engineers for everything from the very beginning to be involved and so on. So it's really, I see a lot of companies that don't have like this big security department that they're typically a couple of people. And this is kind of the reality that we are facing. And that's why I think also why I'm also stating that we also need to gain this cybersecurity know-how, at least fundamentals, because it's really, we don't have all the people ready to be able to do that. And yeah.
100%. And so my big push always is to try to appeal to someone's self-interest. And I always tell testers, maybe I'm wrong, that if you have testing skills that include security testing, performance testing, you're going to be more employable.
Yeah.
So how do you motivate your team? Like, are there any tools or techniques that you recommend people learn if they want to, like you said, learn the fundamentals? Do you recommend OWASP or any other sites where they can learn more? If like they had this tool on their resume or this technique, they probably would pop a little more than someone else.
I think first of all, actually, I was once in a project also together with Quace where we with Quace and developers, where we implemented a registration. And, we implemented registration. And I remember back then we had some UI tests running with Selenium, to validate the registration. And then on another sprint, we added a reCAPTCHA, Google reCAPTCHA. And I remember that once we added it, I wasn't able to automate the UI tests anymore with Selenium because of the Google reCAPTCHA. But then I played a bit around with it and discovered, well, if I back then with Selenium, with the JavaScript executor, if I removed HTML stuff on the front end, all of a sudden from the reCAPTCHA, I was able to complete the registration process. And at first, I was like, yeah, I did it. And so no, wait, something seems pretty off here. I shouldn't be able to do that. And I remember that when I was talking with developers, explaining them what I did, like bypassing the front end and so on, I saw in their faces, I got some respect from them. Right, the first developer said, "Wait, man, you're a hacker." You see, you also get then respect from developers when you show also such things, and not just we are testing from a functional perspective. But I think especially such things, it also is good for your reputation within the team. Actually,
I completely agree. So you also mentioned earlier adding static like security scans when developers checking code. Do you have any recommendations for that? Because a lot of times I know developers get, because just like other tests, sometimes security tests are flaky or they're not really reliable in the sense that you get a ton of them, you don't know where to focus in on. I don't know if you have any experience with rules of thumb that you can do to make those scans really effective.
I would say typically what we do is we do SonarQube. We use SonarQube with the typical, you have a security rating, right? In every SonarQube report. And this is, I would say, the best start. First, start with that and keep up the rating, because this is kind of, I would say, also the low hanging fruit, because every project would have something like a SonarQube in place. And you might then go deeper and really having maybe 45 error, whatever, but even having already that helps a lot with the security aspect, I would say.
All right. So you are director of quality assurance. So I assume you're involved in hiring. Do you look for testers that have security skills when you go through resumes, or do you just look for someone that has an open mind of trying different things?
It's really open mind how they approach problems, because I think the strength of a QA is to, the behavior and the pattern on how you test something. You typically think about, I'm that user maybe, and that user, how would that user buy something in a web shop or somewhere else? And I think it's really important then think about, I'm a hacker now, and what could I do maybe to bypass some security restriction? And sometimes it doesn't even need to be super highly sophisticated, but it really can be more on that level. That's for we hire more for mindset. But however, we need some technical know-how, understand how APIs work, because at the end of the day, we have a lot of web-based projects, and everything is going API first and so on, and it's then very critical that you understand how API works, what's a get, what's a post, and so on. And this is like something we also look for when we hire people, that they understand those concepts.
All right, just reminds me of APIs. A lot of times they're not as secure as the front end because you don't see them. So you can't see them. So who's going to mess with them? But yet they seem to be some of the most vulnerable hacks that I've seen over the years. So any advice around making sure you create secure APIs then?
Yes. To be honest, I think so my biggest advice is when, let's say as an example, you have a newsletter where you can subscribe with your email address, right? And we as tester might take a look at it and say like, okay, I'm taking a look at the front end and there is some regex, right, that validates the email. And then I see, okay, is it working? Is it not working? But from a security aspect, what's more important is the API itself, right? So because I, as a hacker, might just bypass that, and then I might like provide a very long string, millions of very long strings, which might bring down my database completely, right? Because it's out of memory or whatever, right? So I think the biggest takeaway is really on API security, especially on that level. I don't see necessarily, let's say, from network security, how everything is configured. Yeah, there you might add also cybersecurity to it. But I think really it's on the level of application security where IQA can bring a lot of value, especially when you take a look at the whole maybe user journey of the customer and understand how everything works together, right? And at the end of the day, a cybersecurity engineer might have like maybe 4-5 days time to pen test an application, and it will always be too little. But theoretically, they could like do this for months also.
Absolutely. All right, Boris, question might be a little odd, is that maybe it's not odd. So ever since I started in my career as a tester, performance engineer, automation engineer, I've always been told that the job's going away. We're going to be replaced. And now with AI, I'm getting more and more of that. But you have the title of director of quality assurance, which to me is a rarer title because it seems to be more director of development now that are in charge of testers and QA. So I guess my short answer question to this is, where do you see if someone's listening, their role as a tester? Do you see it as a valid role going forward? Do you see AI being disruptive or replacing testers or anything like that?
I feel set back in time again when test automation came out.
Yes,
everybody's
exactly.
talking like, why do we need quality engineers or tester or however you want to call us? But I think from my perspective, we should really use this as an opportunity to improve our work as we did it, right? Test automation helped us to get rid of, to be honest, a pretty boring regression test that you have to do manually every day. I mean, that's not fun, to be honest. And that's how, let's say, test automation improved our quality of work and the fun I have at work, right? It's much more broader. I also have to automate more into development, right? And I think the AI is also the next big step that will also help us to maybe get rid of maybe additional some things that we probably even are not that well suited as humans, but there will always be the need for humans to test an application. So I don't see that really happening, and I'm pretty sure it won't. It will actually help us to make our job even more fun.
100% agree. What I do see though is people leveraging now AI for security hacks. So is that something you're aware of, or something testers need to be aware of? Like, how do they keep up to date then that, not only are we dealing with known vulnerabilities, but now we have AI being leveraged to kind of find other vulnerabilities we may not have thought of?
So you mean more now, for example, I use maybe something like ChatGPT that is more focused on security and gives me some advice? Or do you mean like more towards AI services, some like a chatbot or whatever, and how like could this lead to security risks?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
both. Let's go with the last one probably first.
Yeah, let's go with the last one. So I see this like as a very big need. Also, security is important in that aspect. So there are a lot of vulnerabilities, you could say, but in general, they are like two most common. And the one is first the AI jailbreak, right? Where you can basically bypass the security restriction of, let's say, ChatGPT, right? That, as an example, ChatGPT shouldn't generate you a phishing email or some malicious code that you can use to hack an application, right? It has some standards. But in the past, for example, some of those were even be able, you could bypass that if you provide it in base 64 encoded, and then it returns you really that what you want to have. And so you can always bypass that. Sometimes, especially as soon as there is a new model, it might again start from the beginning. That's the first thing. And also the second thing is about, so I talk about jailbreak, right? And the second one is prompt injection. So I'm, the also like GPT scans websites and so on. Yeah, I then might have like in a website maybe an image that looks for me like an image, but for GPT, it's a command to forward you to maybe another page or do something else that you can't see as a human, right? And so that's also, I think, where we need to be really careful when we use an AI, to be aware of that. And I think there, especially also, QAs can bring values into that to understand it, kind of to try even to break, in this case, the AI in a way, or try to highlight some security issues based on that. And maybe on very simple example, let's say we have a web shop and implement a chatbot. I, as a QA, would first take a look at that chatbot shouldn't generate me some Python code. Let's call it like that, right? That wouldn't be very good. Or that chatbot shouldn't leak some data that maybe are hidden for other users, which is also very important. And I think that's something also as a QA with our like mindset on how we approach problems. It's definitely something we also can test and cover.
That's a great point. I speak with a lot of companies that are starting to build ChatGPT into their applications. And I just thought of it with you thinking like it could be trained on data that you don't know that someone leaked a secret or something, or even a credit card number for testing that's valid.
Yes.
And so if you don't test that in that way as a hacker or in security, that you're going to be vulnerable. So it seems like it's going to be even more demand now if that's something your company's dealing with.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Boris, you got yourself trained up in security, getting more involved. How can you have QA maybe enable themselves to be more involved in security? Do you have like an approach or what you did that you think would work for them as well?
Yeah, so also that you previously also mentioned OWASP top 10, and I think that's, for example, a good start, especially when you work in web-based applications. So this is because there are so many different things, and you really first need to find the focus. Where is your place? And typically it's OWASP top 10, and there are a lot of trainings that you can do on Udemy. There are plenty of trainings. What I can also recommend aside from that is, for example, a typical Udemy training on OWASP top 10 is also, for example, to try Hack Me Academy. Quite often within this academy, you have like, it explains you the concept, how it works, and then you immediately can test it out on a real environment. So it's, of course, a mocked environment. So it's behind VPN everything, but you can train it out and really immediately apply to understand how that works. So, and in addition to that, what I also would recommend is when you want to practice it, there is also the OWASP Top 10 Truth Shop that you can host locally on your environment. And then you can really try it out, play around with it, and really try to maybe see how, let's say, these SQL injections work, for example, or some other threats that are basically happening there. And as a final, there are like two more points that I want to mention. There is also the crappy API vulnerabilities in kind of local environment that you can run, where you can really then also test it on your own from APIs, try to hack APIs in a way. And there is also a pretty good book I would recommend. It's Hacking APIs by Corey Ball. It's really a nice book that also tells you with examples where you can really use the crappy API to really try it out, how it works and so on. And it's really nice and well structured and really help also QAs to understand about API security. And for me, API security is still one of the most important, crucial things in the web development, as like with microservices and everything API first. And yeah, it's good, but we need to make them also secure and in a way. And as final point, I would also highlight hack to box. So if you really kind of gained some basics and really want to try it out on a, let's say, environment, then I would really recommend hack to box. It has a lot of gamification elements where you can progress for, let's say, a script kiddie to a hacker, then to a lead hacker or something like that by kind of hacking different environments and so on. It's a lot of fun. It's maybe time intensive, that's for sure. But that's also a lot of fun to understand, especially how maybe this hacker or this hacker group actually might try to penetrate your application in what's their approach and so on. And this is really also super helpful to understand the methodologies of hackers.
Awesome stuff. Okay, Boris, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their security testing efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
The actual security advice is really to take cybersecurity seriously and to think on this on a holistic level. So it's not also just QA's, it's not developers' responsibility, it's also not just cybersecurity experts' responsibility, it should be the whole team responsibility. And that's also why we as QA's also have to keep up with that, with some security fundamentals to be able to achieve that. And how they can contact me, I would say feel free to reach out to me, for example, on LinkedIn or any other, like on my email address, I can also provide it, and also happy to help in any, I would say, possible way I can.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A514. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers. Hey, thank you for tuning in. It's incredible to connect with close to 400,000 followers across all our platforms and over 40,000 email subscribers who are at the forefront of automation, testing, and DevOps. If you haven't yet, join our vibrant community at testguild.com, where you become part of our elite circle driving innovation in software testing and automation. And if you're a tool provider or have a service looking to empower our guild with solutions that elevate skills and tackle real-world challenges, we're excited to collaborate. Visit testguild.info to explore how we can create transformative experiences together. Let's push the boundaries of what we can achieve.
Oh, the Test Guild Automation Testing Podcast. With flutes and lyres, the bards began their song. A tune of knowledge, a melody of code. Through the air it spread like wildfire through the land, guiding testers, showing the secrets to behold.